Welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation all in one place. Right then, my name is Harry Durham. The transfer window is open. Joining me now to look through all of the biggest transfer news of the day is talkSPORT reporter Ben Jacobs. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. This morning, Liam Rosenior was confirmed as the new head coach of Chelsea after leaving Strasbourg. He spoke to the French media and revealed why he's leaving Strasbourg for Stamford Bridge.
The reality in football is there are levels. There are levels of clubs. I know that the ambition of this club is to reach the very highest level. The reality of that at the moment is that Strasbourg is not on the level of Chelsea. It's not as big a club. It will grow and it will achieve things in the future. But there are certain clubs that you just cannot turn down. So I hope the fans can see that, and I hope they're proud in a way that somebody who's worked here has been identified to be the manager of a Champions League winning current club world champions. I hope that people can see it in that way and can understand how difficult it was for me to make the decision to leave the club.
And it's quite rare to see a manager speaking like this, even though Chelsea and Strasbourg are part of the Blue Co. I mean, was it a sense of respect that Liam Rosenior was trying to give back to the people of Strasbourg and the club?
I think so. Obviously, from Chelsea's point of view and Blue Co, they wanted to do this in the right way. We should point out that Strasbourg fan groups have issued statements saying that this is humiliating and they don't see it as a respectful move. But in football, managers that are young and in demand and successful are always going to be of interest. And of course, from Chelsea's point of view, they know Rosenior very well. And as a consequence, mid-season and with his long-term potential, he was seen as the right fit. Paul Winstanley, in particular, has worked with him for quite some time. And I think from Blue Co's perspective, even if Strasbourg fans don't agree, and I think fans of any club losing a top manager mid-season would be disappointed, but if you own both Strasbourg and Chelsea, then you have to be very sensitive as to the timeline. And in the end, Rosenior and senior Blue Co officials decided the best approach was for him to return to Strasbourg, speak first to the French press, keep it away from Chelsea as much as possible, even though he confirmed the move, and then allow Callum McFarlane to focus on the game against Fulham without any disruption, followed by Rosenior's managerial debut for Chelsea against Charlton in the FA Cup at the weekend. And of course, Mark Keller, the Strasbourg president, flew over along with David Weir, the Strasbourg sporting director, ex-Brighton, and held meetings. And that wasn't just about getting a deal done or the optics of how to announce it. It was also about trying to find Strasbourg a replacement as well, so they're not left in limbo mid-season. And we're expecting confirmation of who that new Strasbourg manager is. Maybe even by the time people are watching this, 2 final candidates. One of them is the ex-Wolves boss, Gary O'Neill. So there was a meticulous process in many ways about how to announce Rosenior. And just one small thing as well, because people may be listening and hearing me speak his surname Rosenior, whereas perhaps the most commonly pronounced version of it is Rosenior. And I am told by sources close to the new Chelsea boss that that is in fact his preferred pronunciation. So Rosenior rather than Rosenior. But either way, however you pronounce the surname, he's the new manager of Chelsea. It's a 5.5-year contract with a further 1-year option.
I mean, when you're talking about a 5-year contract in Chelsea's habit of sacking managers, it's so tough to put it into perspective. But was this always going to be the natural progression for Rosenior, going from Strasbourg to Chelsea? Obviously, Maresca and his falling outs with everyone that had happened at the top. Was this always going to be a natural progression from Blue Co?
Well, the belief within Blue Co is that anybody, a manager, a player, a coach, can rise up. There's always that possibility. and Resenio doing so well at Strasbourg had been earmarked, to my understanding, as a long-term potential Chelsea manager, and then it was simply moved forwards. And I think that it's normal when you've got someone in your group doing well, that if you have to make a change mid-season, you would turn to them, because Emmiger, who will be joining Chelsea, he's worked with. In addition, Andre Santos is a player that Resenio got the best out of at Strasbourg, and he's had several other players that ultimately may become very important to Chelsea Football Club, including Kendry Paez and Mike Penders, who are both on loan there, and Mamadou Sarr, the defender, as well. So there's continuity. That's the first thing. Second aspect in all of this is, if Chelsea are going to back young players, why not young managers? Because it's essentially the same philosophy. Find people just before they become absolutely box office and better them. And with Maurizio Pochettino, it was the opposite. They went for a short-term contract. It didn't work. And he had an incredible CV compared to some of the other names that have come in since. Enzo Maresca definitely created a reputation at Man City as an assistant, and obviously got Leicester promoted back to the Premier League, but not quite in the same ballpark of what he had achieved and who he had managed as Maurizio Pochettino, who was probably the anomaly, because remember, before Poch, there was Graham Potter, another manager who had done incredible in the Premier League at Brighton and before in Sweden, but was definitely seen as on an upward trajectory. So I think Chelsea want to reward players, coaches, managers if they're young and doing well. And the whole point is they've got a lot of belief in several people in different departments, and if their progression goes according to plan, they can rise up to Chelsea. And we've seen that already with several players, and now Liam Resenio as well. But did they want to do it right now, or were they hoping a few months ago at least that it could all work out with Enzo Maresca? I think the answer to that question is the ideal was to keep Maresca. It was only probably 5 weeks ago when Chelsea were backing him. They were endorsing his rotation. They were pointing out that he had a 5-year contract. And of course, even last festive period when Maresca was struggling, Chelsea were doubling down privately, at least through sources I spoke to, and saying that he was their manager for the long-term future. So the manner in which the Maresca saga unraveled and he left probably wasn't planned from all sides, and therefore Chelsea had to move quickly. And luckily for them, Resenio is seen as a strong option and an available one that they've been able to get. So hopefully from Chelsea's point of view, it can now all work out and they can move forwards. And regarding the contract length, what I would say is that virtually every Chelsea head coach going forwards now is expected to get that 5.5-year contract with a 1-year option. There will naturally be reviews or breaks that come a little bit earlier to offer all sides protections. But I think Chelsea learned a lesson from Pochettino that if you're going to give the sporting directors long-term contracts, if you're going to pitch a long-term project and then you're only going to give a manager a couple of years, it's very difficult to stay aligned, because the manager has to come in also believing that he or she is going to be given time. And if they're feeling like, as with Pochettino, they are subject to a review only 12 months in, whilst everyone else is building long term, that's a bit of a strategic mismatch. And this is why I think Chelsea want to back Resenio, like they did with Enzo Maresca, with a very long-term deal.
We've been saying for a couple of years we've got no elite English managers coming through as well. Do you think this could potentially be the springboard for Liam Resenio to put his stamp on not only Premier League football? He did a great job at Hull, and was sacked after they missed out on the playoffs a couple of years ago, and the state of the club that was in at that point as well. And I can remember following Resenio, obviously, when he was working with Wayne Rooney at Derby County. Is this the springboard in his career? I know it's a massive club. I know they're the world champions at the moment. With his age, of him being 41 as well, relatable to a lot of the younger players as well, because he's not a senior head. I mean, Enzo Maresca was only 45. But do you think he'll be able to galvanise a squad? And do you actually really see him being a main figurehead English manager moving forward in the years to come?
I hope so. I mean, it's fantastic to see a young black English manager being given a chance in the Premier League. It's a huge step up by the way, but that's also the advantage when you hire within your multi-club group. You can say, we've seen a lot of what this guy can do behind the scenes, and even though from the outside in it may look like a gamble, Chelsea will believe it's a more considered decision because they've seen how this guy works and interacts with Blueco figures. But nonetheless, it's now a pressure cooker. And of course, at any big club, you don't, as we found with Ruben Amorim, get an automatic 3 years or 5 years. So he will have to deliver. And I still expect Champions League football qualification to be the Chelsea aim in the second half of the season. And at the moment, they're relatively on track for that. And now Chelsea have won a couple of trophies under Blueco. Of course, they want more. So this project now has to move forwards. With every new manager, especially a young one, there's a grace period and there's a bit of patience involved. But I think to the Arsenal project, which I know the Chelsea owners really admire, and it's only this season that it's gone from build now to win now. And Andrea Berta's come in to almost ruffle a few feathers and say to Mikel Arteta, of course, we're working together and on the same page, but Berta's remit is we need instant results. And Arteta is naturally on track for that at the moment. But there's definitely a slight divide there between Arteta, who's been there laying the foundations from the beginning in a slower moving project, and Berta coming in and saying, we've actually now got to back this up with silverware. With the Chelsea project, they took over the club in 2022. So summer 2027, heading into the 27-28 season, will be 5 years. And I think regardless of who the manager is, whether it was Maresca or hopefully now Rosenior in for the long term, by that 2027-2028, there will also be an expectation that this can't be billed anymore as a slow-moving, patient, progressive project. There has to be some consistent return, which in hindsight by 27-28, we might be looking back and saying is starting with that Club World Cup and UEFA Conference League trophies that they won under Enzo Maresca. So Rosenior is joining at a fascinating point in this project because it's not the very beginning. For him, it's a brand new job and it might take a little bit of time, but there's high expectations amongst the fan base and still the owners that they can't keep saying we're 3 years away from something. We need another 2 or 3 seasons. We need another 2 or 3 managers, because the fan base are kind of impatient already and they expect something tangible now, which I think they did get under Enzo Maresca. But then if you're going to change the manager, you have to show that that was for the right decision to move the project forwards. So Chelsea have got unwavering belief in their project and full support behind Rosenior. But this isn't Strasbourg, it's Chelsea Football Club. And he'll start with a lot of support and people wanting him to succeed. And it's fantastic, as I say, to watch him get this opportunity. But it's not a job that will come with a long grace period, because Chelsea Football Club will always have high expectations. And I think Rosenior's statement when he was announced backs up that position, because it instantly alludes to the fact that this is, quote, a huge club and needs to continue winning trophies.
Up to Manchester then, and the vacant manager head role. What is it? Ruben Amorim didn't know what he was, if he was the manager or the head coach. Well, the two have parted ways now. His dismissal was yesterday. Former Manchester United and under-18s head coach Darren Fletcher will be taking over on an interim basis. A lot of managers and current managers who are currently, situated at different clubs are always linked to the Manchester United job. You think of Unai Emery. Marco Silva's another name that gets brought up. Oliver Glasner. And there's even talks of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer going back to Manchester United. Ben, are we in some sort of weird time warp at the moment? Is that a possibility that Ollie could go back to Manchester United?
You can never say never. So there's 3 options. The first is Darren Fletcher comes in the short term whilst they find a caretaker, and then a summer appointment of a permanent manager. Second option is Darren Fletcher does well and is backed until the end of the season, and then a permanent manager comes in. And of course, the third option is they just find the right name mid-season. At the moment, but it's fluid, Manchester United are leaning towards option 1 or option 2. In other words, hiring that permanent manager in the summer when more names are likely to be either available or gettable without huge financial repercussions. So after Darren Fletcher gets at least the next game away, Manchester United will then decide what they want to do. And if they go for a more experienced caretaker for the remaining half or so of the season, one option is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who would be very keen if Manchester United approach him. And Michael Carrick could also come into contention as well. And again, I reiterate, it's not yet been discounted that Fletcher could just continue, but it's being discussed right now and in the next 24, 48 hours. And there is a possibility that it's a different caretaker. Then if we look ahead to the summer, I'm told very clearly Manchester United want a manager with Premier League experience. So we hear names like Xavi and Zinedine Zidane, and it's absolutely true to my knowledge that Xavi would like the Manchester United job. But I think at the moment, the current trend is towards a manager that has experience within the Premier League. Oliver Glasner, one option. Again, if they tried now, he would be interested, but it's going to be more costly than just letting his contract run down. And cost is a factor, because if you think about compensation paid for Ruben Amorim from Sporting, if he takes his severance, even though publicly he said he wouldn't, that's another 10 million, plus the fact that you might have to spend on a new manager if you are going to hire somebody in the middle of the season. And then the fact that he's already earned somewhere close to 8 million in wages. So if we remove potential compensation for other managers and just take the Amorim part, the money they paid to get him, the money that they paid him whilst he was there, and the potential severance, that could be somewhere in the region of £27 million. So, of course, if Manchester United could wait for Oliver Glasner, that would be more preferable. You've got Marco Silva, who's not yet signed a Fulham deal. You've got Andoni Iraola, whose contract is winding down. So there are names out there in the summer with Premier League experience that Manchester United may consider, particularly Glasner, I am told at this early stage, that can be available but will be easier to get in the summer. Roberto De Zerbi is another one. At the moment, no approach to him, but you might find that he makes the shortlist because he was certainly spoken about before Amorim was appointed. And then there's Maurizio Pochettino as well, who was part of the process before Ruben Amorim was hired, even though I'm not aware that it ever advanced too far. And he's expected to leave the US men's national team after the 2026 World Cup. So there's loads of names not available now or not affordable now that will become relatively feasible once the season and potentially the World Cup ends. And this is why Manchester United are inclined to have an interim until the end of the season, whoever that may be, and then get their new manager in place during the off-season, by which time, hopefully, they'll have Champions League football and things at the club will be a bit more stable.
Marc Guehi's future set to dominate another transfer window. Liverpool missed out in the summer on transfer deadline day after it was called off. Now, Manchester City have emerged as contenders for the defender's signature after it was announced that Gvardiol had fractured his tibia against Chelsea at the weekend. Former Chelsea and Republic of Ireland midfielder Andy Townsend was on talkSPORT Breakfast this morning, was thrown this question by talkSPORT reporter Katie Shanahan.
Does Marc Guehi wait to go to a European giant? Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Inter Milan and Atletico Madrid are all the European clubs that have shown interest in signing Guehi. So, Andy, if you're Marc Guehi, should he wait for the summer or go to City in the January transfer window?
I think with Man City, the chance to work with Guardiola whilst he's still there, I think is a huge attraction for a lot of players. I think it would be fascinating to understand exactly what makes him tick and how he works. Having said that, Katie, I get the feeling with Marc Guehi, he's been absolutely cool with the fact of letting it run out. There's always a worry sometimes for a player when you if that's Marc Guehi, and God forbid that happens, but if that's Marc Guehi that breaks his leg going into his last 6 months, you can find a very different set of circumstances awaits you in the summer. But it looks like he's already made his mind up to go down that road, to see it out, and then literally have, and he will do. He will do. You would think he's a definite starter for England. You would think he's going to have the pick over half a dozen of the very biggest clubs out there.
It surprises me just a little bit, because I know as a free agent he can then call the shots. But he's not going to get too shabby an offer from Man City, is he?
Correct. He's not. He's not. And look, he may well, Jeff, he may well think, you know what, to go to City right now when they're
possibly win the title.
Possibly, but they're going to be certainly in the chase for it. Yeah, and he can, and that might sharpen his game up just that little bit more, find even a little bit more than we've seen from Marc Guehi up to now, which would stand him in very good stead for a World Cup in the summer under Tuchel. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it would be a very, very good decision, good move for him. But I don't know. I think he's just gone into his last. He's now into his last 6 months. And I think that's a very attractive proposition for a very good player.
But it's a weird one. If you're in the position of Palace, if you want to get the money rather than him walking on a free, it seems it might be a case of respect from Marc Guehi, winning the FA Cup at Selhurst Park and Crystal Palace, and then winding down his contract that way. But if you're Palace, surely you're wanting to get the money in this final transfer window before the summer when he leaves on a free.
Depends how you define the Palace position. If you're Steve Parish, the money might be appreciated, providing it's more than a nominal kind of fee. But if you're Oliver Glasner, even though his contract is winding down, you probably want to keep the player or have a replacement come in. And then if you're Marc Guehi, he can take his pick of clubs as a free agent at the end of the season, as opposed to leaving now. And Guehi might also be cautious, because if he just stays playing for Crystal Palace, perhaps that's his best chance of getting a starting spot in Thomas Tuchel's World Cup squad. If he moves to Man City and the injured players come back, if he goes to Liverpool and he's behind Van Dijk or Ibrahima Konate, then there might be less minutes, or it might take time to acclimatise to his new side. So Guehi, I think, might be a roadblock to a mid-season exit, because stability for him is best. And financially speaking, he can also get a very lucrative package as a free agent in the summer. So that's where we're at the moment. I'm told the player hasn't necessarily ruled it out mid-season, but would need convincing, whereas Crystal Palace are open to an exit on the right terms. And those terms are two things, at least this early in January. One is they want more, believe it or not less, than the 35 million fee that Liverpool agreed over the summer. And the second Palace stipulation, naturally, is they'd also have to line up a replacement. And I think the two things are tied, because if Crystal Palace get enough money and it's not just a nominal fee, they can afford a replacement now, and they themselves may have to overpay. Whereas if it's a very small fee, then perhaps it's more valuable to Palace to get their replacement in the summer and keep Marc Guehi until the end of the season. Then if we talk about the suitors, there's a few things to say. Yes, Manchester City are serious about exploring a deal, because Josko Vardiel has a fracture. Diaz and Stones are also out as well. Liverpool still maintain an interest. Summer is their preference, but are they going to be forced to enter the race earlier if Manchester City do so? Bayern and Real Madrid and even Inter have made inquiries as well. But I'm told Barcelona have ruled themselves out the race. So in the last 2 weeks, Barca held a meeting with the Guehi camp, and Hansi Flick was also present as well, and they heard Guehi's financial demands. He naturally wants to earn what we could broadly say is a top Premier League wage, somewhere similar to Antoine Semenyo, and reports have that wage, once his Man City move is formalised, at somewhere between 150 and 175,000 pounds a week. So Guehi is naturally looking for a big wage increase and to be a top 5 or top 10 earner at maybe a big 6 club in the Premier League, and that wage would have to translate to a Real Madrid or a Barcelona. Barca heard those wage demands, which are not necessarily excessive, but finances are tight at Barcelona, and they've decided to not progress with Guehi for the summer. So Barca are out, but 4 clubs in particular, and maybe Inter, are in the mix. And they are, as I say, Man City, Liverpool, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. And we wait and see whether we get any developments in January, or if Guehi continues to want to just play for Palace, do the World Cup, and then have his pick of clubs as a free agent after that tournament.
Ben, quickly, just before we finish up, are we any closer to Anton Semenyo signing for Manchester City?
Yeah, I mean, it's done. It's agreed in principle. It's not really about the teams negotiating. So the 65 million release clause, which we can broadly say is that, although it's more like 60 million plus add-ons, and then there's a solidarity payment. So for Bournemouth, they can define it as 65 million on their books, but it might end up being ever so slightly cheaper to Man City. But that release clause, which expires on the 10th of January, didn't actually have any payment terms. So the starting position of Bournemouth was, if you trigger it, we want our 65 million up front, or 60 plus 5, whatever you want to call it. And naturally, there was some flexibility to negotiate the payment terms. They've done that, and Man City are expected to pay it in 3 over about 2 years. And everything is ready, the contracts and so on. And the only thing that was debated between the sides has been how many games Semenyo can continue to play for Bournemouth before he makes the move. Now, at the time of recording, we're waiting for Andoni Iraola to confirm whether or not Semenyo will play one final game against Spurs or just make the move. Either way, the deal is done. He will be a Manchester City player, and it's just awaiting that roadmap for when exactly the deal can be formalised. Man United tried, not in the race. Liverpool never made a hijack. Semenyo will be a Manchester City player, and it will be done in time for January the 10th before that clause expires.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it massively. I'll speak to you very soon. You've been watching The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place.